From the very beginning of the pandemic, there has been one question that some have focused on almost to the exclusion of anything else, which is specifically where did COVID come from? Like we know it came from China initially, specifically Wuhan, but more specifically than that, was it a lab leak? And so over the past year and a half or so, you have seen endless speculation and conspiracy theories evolving from this. And by the way, one of the reasons those proliferated as much as they did is it is not impossible to imagine that that could have happened. Countries do develop biological weapons. It is a thing. It's regrettable, but it does happen. So it is possible. Some though, like that is the only thing that they can think of about the pandemic to care about is it happened from a lab, which means that the Chinese government did it, so we get to demonize them. Also, Fauci somehow was involved, so we can attack him. Well, look, it never really made sense to do that even when they thought they had the evidence that had come from that, but apparently that evidence is not robust. And one other explanation, what you might have initially heard of when the pandemic began, that it happened in one of these so-called wet markets, more data pointing to that being the origin. Scientists just in the last week released a pair of extensive studies that point to a large food and live animal market in Wuhan as the origin of the pandemic. They concluded that the coronavirus was very likely present in live mammals sold to the Wuhan seafood wholesale market in late 2019 and suggested that the virus spilled over into people working or shopping there on 2 separate occasions. One of those involved in the study, as a co-author, says, when you look at all the evidence together, it's an extraordinarily clear picture that the pandemic started at that market. And if you want to get into their findings, you have literal like breakdowns of the individual stalls where they found COVID. There are heat maps of how it was, it sort of moves out from those positions to other parts of the market. And in fact, they specifically go into, it's gonna be beyond the bounds of this show, but different strains of the coronavirus. And they have mapped out the spread of those different strains in a way that makes sense timeline wise that this was the origin of it. So just putting it out there, if anyone even cares anymore. I know some people have moved on from the very lucrative discussion about the lab leak thing, but Sabrina, the scientists seem to think this is where it came from.
I mean, I just think that it's impressive that science has evolved in a way that we're even able to trace it that deep to the individual stalls. That's amazing. But yeah, I don't know how many people are actually all that concerned about where it's come from. But I do think that that's amazing. I think that's good. And it can, put to rest the whole lab myth about this at least.
Yeah, and I don't know if that'll help with any of the racism specifically, because many racists here in America have been perfectly willing to attack Asian Americans when they thought it was coming from the market too. But maybe it'll help fight back against a little bit of the xenophobia, specifically sort of trying to gin up opposition to the Chinese government to try to increase tensions between our countries. That has been a sort of convenient boogeyman for not only the right, who almost all believe that we should have a more tense relationship with China, but some Democrats as well. It's a convenient way to move forward that narrative. Doesn't seem like there's a lot of evidence behind it though. I don't know. Thankfully, Sabrina, that has been one thing that I haven't seen a lot coming out of Biden. You had the trade wars between the Chinese government and ours under Donald Trump, but so far it seems like Biden hasn't been as willing to dive into that sort of thing.
Good. Bars low, but good.
Yes. Finally, by the way, I want to give you just one more excerpt from this. By the spring of 2020, senior members of the Trump administration, you might recall, were promoting the idea that it had escaped from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. There's no direct evidence that the new coronavirus was present at the lab before the pandemic. Researchers there have denied claims of a lab leak, which, by the way, we might expect that they would do. But if you're going to continue to claim that it came from there, you have to provide some sort of evidence for that. And when you don't have that, and the evidence is robust that it came from the market, I think we can probably safely conclude that that is where it came from.